Hello and a big welcome to the latest in our Creative Brief Explores interview series on thriving creative partnerships. During the months of June and July, we're releasing one of these interviews a week on the Creative Brief platform, so don't miss them. It is ultimately a topic that we've been focused on for some time now, acknowledging that actually there are some, obviously for 12 or 24 months even, there have been some really challenging market dynamics at play that see relations between brands and agencies more than a little strained. And in our observation, that sees fewer enduring and mutually equitable relationships than ever between the two parties. And I suppose it's in that context that we feel that brands and agencies really need to double down and work harder at talking through their issues than ever before to ultimately set the right conditions for thriving creative partnerships again. So today I am very pleased to be able to bring to the table to discuss the topic and their relationship both Marg Jobling, who is outgoing CMO of Centrica, the owner of the British Gas brand that we're going to be talking about quite a lot today, and also Sarah Golding, who is CEO and partner at the And Partnership. I'm also, just before we get into the conversation, very pleased to be able to report that British Gas and the And Partnership buck the market trend for shrinking number of enduring relationships and are close to becoming one of the industry's best known double acts. They're also, importantly, producing some cracking work right now, which we'll be talking a lot more about. Finally, before we get into the discussion, the only thing left to say is we're keen to hear your thoughts and questions, so please do join via social and use the hashtag CBExplores and tweet us at Creative Brief. So enough of me. A big warm welcome to you both, Marg and Sarah. Thank you for joining us today. How are you coping under lockdown conditions?
Morning, Charlie. Yeah, I'm now in a little routine. I think I've realised my limitations as a teacher and a general housewife. But yeah, we're just getting there, healthy and can't really complain.
Good, glad to hear.
I don't seem to have developed a routine, so I'm slightly jealous of Marg's routine. Maybe that's where I'm going wrong. But yes, happy to say all safe, all just about sane. As you know, we've had a few Wi-Fi issues in the Golding household. This is indeed take 3, and I'm now on my second broadband provider.
And we can hear you loud and clear, which is great.
Hooray!
Well, look, we've got sort of 25 minutes or so today, I think. So we'll jump straight in, if okay with both of you. And I think really, ideally, we'll start in terms of just talking a bit about the relationship, actually. And I suppose, just to introduce for everyone listening today, both of you personally and your businesses have known each other for some time. Are you able just to elaborate for us a little bit on how long you've worked together? And I suppose what we're keen to dig into is what that means in terms of the relationship from the point of view of trust, respect, transparency, and anything else.
Yeah. So I think, the Centrica and partnership relationship is 14 years old now, Goldie? Yeah. 14 or longer? Yeah. Me personally worked with Goldie and the team for, it'll be 6 years, so 6 years October, so 5.5 years. And, and I think, I don't know whether I'm a massive believer in the work's as good as the client. So relationship with the agency is critical for me. And I think, we got a fantastic relationship. So both pretty direct northerners, don't muck around, tell it how it is. We don't always agree. I think Goldie will be quick to tell you, but we always we're focused on output, and actually that's the most important thing. So great working relationship, but like any other marriage, isn't it? You have your good days and your bad days, but the most important bit for me is communication.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think everyone assumes that, when you hear about these well-known, long-standing client agency relationships, that, it must be easy. I actually think that the pressure is much higher in those relationships because you have so much more invested. And, particularly with Marg, I feel, you feel like you're letting somebody down as well as the business. So I think it's hard. But I think the secret to our success has been brutal honesty with each other, with our teams, ensuring that we all work the same way. There are no grudges, there are no sidebar chats, there's no politics actually. And I think that often gets in the way. Instead, we put the brand and the business and the task in hand as our focus. And we make sure also, and I think this is really important, that, we have a bit of fun along the way. There's quite a lot of laughter, there's a few tears, there's a few shouts. There's lots of late night calls, early morning calls along the way. But because you've got this shared vision and you've got each other's back, it really helps. And I think that I'd say that would be the secret to our success.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, obviously really reassuring for people, I think, to hear, because from looking from the outside in on long-term relationships, it's easy to assume that it's a perfect relationship and everything's rosy all the time. But have you had to sort of work hard to get to the point where you can both openly speak your minds and be quite frank and honest with each other, or has that just actually naturally come from day one?
I think that, no, I don't. I think it's a style thing, Charlie. Like I think we've got very similar values, and and life's too short. I mean, I generally go, if you're not happy with something, then have the conversation. And we've always, but equally, if something's brilliant, recognize when it's brilliant. So I think between us, we've got very similar style around, we really care about the work, feel passionate about doing a good job. We're quite vested in, I think, each other's success, because, if we produce great work as a client and the agency produces great work, and that, it's self-fulfilling. So, no, I don't think, I mean, we have had to spend time with the broader teams and, how do we want this relationship to work, particularly, I mean, I think we'll talk about the pitch, but, coming out of that pitch, how do you get everybody to have the same sort of principles or manifesto about how you want to operate together? We've had to put quite a lot of effort into that space.
Yeah, brilliant. We're going to come on and talk about that in a second, actually. We're keen to dig a bit more into that. Do you think that it's fair to say that, from both of your experience of not just this relationship, but others, is there any truth in the fact that quality of relationship between client and agency is a genuine predictor of quality of work, do you think?
Direct correlation. I think there's direct correlation. I think we're a service people industry, and I think I said at the beginning, I think clients get the work they deserve, and actually if you can create an environment of you trust each other, you listen to each other, you're prepared to take a punt together, because actually, do you know what, if we end up with creative that we don't think is good enough, then we are part of that process as much as Goldie and the team are. So I definitely think there's a straight line between, have you got an aligned view, and do you have a real strength of relationship, and do you create great output? I passionately believe that.
Yeah.
I think it's a shame that there is a tendency in our industry, particularly when, a new CMO comes into a role to pitch the business. And actually, Marg, we had to prove ourselves to Marg. When Marg came in, we'd worked with other CMOs, but Marg kind of respected that we knew some stuff, that we knew things about the brand and the business that could help her. And then she kind of gave us that chance. And I think really good CMOs do that. I think the easy thing to do is, let me get all the best brains in town to mull over my problems and give me lots of ideas. And I think that happens all too often. But what was brilliant, and there are other people that do this, but Marg was brilliant at this. She came in. Every agency feels wobbly when new management structures come into play on an important client, but I particularly knew from the start that you could take her at face value. What Marg was saying was, do this, let's do this together, and we'll win, and we have.
Okay, brilliant. And that did, though, so it didn't lead to an immediate pitch, but should we move on to the fact that, so in, I think it was the first half of 2019, wasn't it? So actually not that long ago.
When Marg betrayed me.
Can you imagine that, Cole?
I remember,
in the first half of 2019, you did go through Centrica as a whole went through a really large global pitch, didn't you? Which, of course, must have been stressful for all involved and caused inevitable strain. I think it's fair to say you also credit the resulting sort of reset and structure with the position you're now in and the work that you're now delivering. Can you just, Marg, perhaps start by telling us a bit about what led to the pitch, and then perhaps we talk a little bit about how that all unfolded as well.
So the brief, and it wasn't a fun conversation, to be honest, with Goldie, but when I went in as CMO and started looking across all of the business units, we were quite disparate in how we went to market. So different agencies, different quality of work. And the thing I really passionately believe in is how do we leverage data much more effectively? So put data at the heart of what we do and actually transform how we go to market. So the pitch was really our chance to look across all of our consumer businesses and come up with one solution that actually helps step change internally as much as externally in the work we're creating for customers. So that's why we were keen to say, all bets are off with all agency partners. Who is the best partnership that we can broker, relationship with? And I think, pitches are really hard, but I think it was critical in our case because one, we wanted all of the business units to feel ownership of the output. There's nothing worse than being told that you're changing agency when you've got no say in that. And actually, we really wanted it to force us internally, actually, to think differently about how our brands show up, how our marketing model operates, and how do we generate fantastic output and leverage what we actually is a competitive edge for us, which is data. And we weren't using it as effectively as we could. So the pitch was our chance to go, right, this is a reset for how marketing shows up within the organisation, but, and the quality of the work we produce for our customers.
Okay. And so you talk, it's interesting, you've talked a lot about, not just here, but in the press as well. I think I've seen a lot, you talk about sort of data-driven, becoming more of a data-driven organisation, particularly more data-led planning from the point of view of your agencies. And I think obviously also quite a big part of it, the pitch process seemed to be about driving much greater integration across multi-channel.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So, our start point is incredibly siloed. Millions of customer records. I said I came out of consumer goods, and you would have killed for. I know where my customer lives. I know what product holdings they've got with us. I can basically profile their lifestyles and what's important to them. And we were not leveraging any of that, Charlie. So what we wanted to actually do was start really building a platform that allowed us to be more sophisticated in the tools we use, whether that's audience planning, but also much more sophisticated in how we take the data and the insight we have within our existing customer base to both drive a better customer experience and, in life experience, but also target customers who look more like the customers we've already got and are of high value. So we basically pitched to look at two things: which agency could give us the best integrated solution and bring data tools and technology to our business to really help us think about how we organize ourselves to deliver that. And, we wanted to do a reset with how our brands showed up. How do we modernize and how do we drive more relevance? So the other part of the process was, not just have you got the technology and the capability, but can we come up with new creative platform to really help people, reposition internally as well as externally, actually, because it was critical to drive internal engagement for the business around how we want the brand to go to market, which is where the creative platform came from.
Okay, brilliant. And Goldie, first question, did you agree with the theory behind the pitch? And secondly, how did you then sort of go about organising yourselves to approach it?
Well, I'm not going to pretend it wasn't the most grueling, longest pitch process I've ever been through, because it was. And I think it's really hard going into a pitch as the incumbent agency of 14, 15 years. It's really hard to win, because when the brief is, this is a reset moment for the business globally, you're not seen as the reset guys. You're seen as the old guys. You're seen as the past, not the future. So there was a long way to go. And I think if you've been a betting man or woman at the time, you would not have put your money on the AND partnership and Nucleus being successful in that pitch.
Yeah.
But I think
that didn't prevent you wanting to be involved in it, though.
My God, do you know me? Absolutely not. I'm not going to let Marg get away that easily. So she says I'm like a dog with a bone. So I think what I had to do is I had to build the team from scratch. So, there's a reason why the agency is called Nucleus. I felt that the right answer to give Marg and her team and the business what they needed to answer the brief was a combination of and a good balance of old and new. So faces, personalities and talents organized together to drive growth. So it was a combination of long-lasting relationships and mutual understanding, I guess, rocket fueled by new talent. And that's why we called ourselves Nucleus, because if you look up Nucleus, and Marg is the chemist amongst us, so she obviously knew this without the wiki definition, but it's a membrane or a membrane structure that contains all the cell's hereditary information, like the old knowledge, if you like, and controls the cell's growth. So that was really important. It also allowed us to organize ourselves very differently for Marg. You know, we were organized in one shared space, blah, blah, blah. And then we kind of virtually organized ourselves around the grid, which was our bespoke one customer view, you know, our data source, and that's made the biggest difference. But it, you know, she was right, actually, even though I told she was wrong, obviously, at the start when we had the conversation, that in order to get where we needed to get to, we had to reset. And there is no way that you could have convinced the other markets like North America and Ireland that we were the answer as we were set up. So it allowed us to reinvent ourselves, bring in the new model, be truly data and customer first, properly integrated, modern in our thinking and our output. So was it worth it? Yes, it was in the end, but I did age about 10 years.
Yeah. And Nucleus that you refer to, that is so that was a new assembly of WPP teams from across WPP agencies, right?
Yes.
Which group of agencies sort of make up Nucleus?
So we're all called, if you asked anybody who is part of the team, they would actually say now they work, you know, they are Nucleus and they have Nucleus URLs and they all live in the same beautiful office, which is nicer than most of our homes. But the component agencies are the AMP Partnership, Mediacom, Wunderman Thompson, and BCW.
Okay, so it is truly integrated team.
Yeah.
And they're
And
all
we've worked
brilliant.
hard on that, Charlie. Hard
Yeah.
on the identity around Nucleus, email addresses, like all this, you know, presentation, PowerPoint formats. It all comes out of the integrated team with the integrated solution. And the bit, and I wouldn't take it away from Goldie, we went into this saying we want change, we want transformation, and we want change. And, you know, and actually, if you'd asked the team at the start, and I've said this to Goldie, I would say 90% of the team would not have thought we would have ended up where we ended up, because the degree of transformation we were looking for was a you know, start again. And actually, and it is really hard for the incumbent, because it's like a comfy pair of slippers. You know, how do you make sure you don't just show up with the way you've always shown up? Because there has to be a reset. So I wouldn't underestimate how, you know, brilliant the team were throughout the pitch. And actually the combination, I think, genuinely of the old and the new, and because it was the new we were looking at, but, you know, actually I think it was rocket fuel, and everyone unanimously got to the answer, which says, you know what, we're signing up for Nucleus.
And I'm right, aren't I, that it's sort of effectively the structure that you've ended up with is, and, you know, the sort of ways of working that you've put in place around that are really, you know, data-led planning and sort of channel mix at the centre. It's all one P&L, Goldie, isn't it? It's the briefing
One
is
step
all
of
one
work.
integrated team.
Yeah. And we've had to work hard for that. I mean, you know, the agency problem is a mirror of our problem. You know, there are multiple agencies with multiple P&Ls and multiple cultures, and so you have to work really hard to come up with one integrated solution. You know, we are a combination of individual business units with their own cultures and their own P&Ls and their own product bosses, and so we have to work really hard to standardize and operate in a consistent way. So, you know, some of that stuff I think is underestimated, how much it can drive a barrier to integration. And on both sides, we've had to work hard to go, we want to standardize, we want one way of operating, we want one, you know, grid, we call it, but data platform. You know, we are going to start looking at, you know, data-led marketing in a consistent way. That didn't exist in our business. We didn't have a single metric, Charlie, in any of the business units that were the same. Right. We didn't have a single brand that traveled across geography. So, you know, we, as a client, really crave, you know, to transform but we've had to work very hard to then think about what does that mean for us and our internal capability. And what's been brilliant is Nucleus are there as the catalyst to really force us to drive that and build relationships with IT. I mean, I've said in other interviews, you know, my new best friend was the CIO, because suddenly I'm saying, how the hell do I plumb first party data in? And you're talking a completely different language when you sit down with the IT boys. You know, I was like, blah, blah, blah. They go, I don't understand what you're talking about. So, you know, the translation of what we want and what the systems, you know, currently do and operate. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of work in the background to actually make it work.
Yeah. And in terms of sort of setting the ways of working, Goldie, perhaps I'll start with you on this one. Is just, and you referenced it in the beginning, the manifesto. I think, you know, it sounded like from our discussion the other day, you quite deliberately put some things in place to ensure that you didn't just slip back into a relationship that was like a sort of comfy pair of slippers for both parties. Can you just elaborate a little bit for us on the manifesto itself and what it was and the aim of it?
Okay, the manifesto was actually an output of reset days that we had in each of the markets. So that was for the local team and the central team. And that was where we literally brutally, honestly sat around a table and said, this is what we want to happen moving forward. This is what we don't want to see moving forward. And it was moderated by an external agency. And that allowed, because of course the reset has to happen both sides. So, you know, we were a bit worried that the promise of the brief and the pitch wouldn't be realised on the Centrica side of things. So it was important that we got all that out on the table from the get-go. And then as a result of those days, we co-created the behaviours that form our manifesto. And
it was genuinely co-created between the two
genuinely
parties.
co-created. We sweated the words, whether we were all prepared to sign up to them. And I think there were about 7 of them. And, you know, some of them are fairly obvious, but never get said. So one might be, we're going to communicate really clearly with each other. You know, if we expect to communicate and are expected to communicate really honestly and clearly with our customers, we should be doing the same amongst ourselves. We always start with the customer. If it isn't in the interest of the customer, we're wasting our time. And we signed up to all of these things. And then at the bottom, we said, and if you don't believe that these behaviours are happening at any one time in your market, in your team, call it out. And we all wrote our names on it, and they're on the walls of every single Nucleus office. And we live by it. And, you know, I can think of a particular time when we were, and I know we're going to get onto here to solve, we were having that, which every agency and client have, the kind of music conversation. And Marg and I were having a little bit of an argument, shall we say, a heated discussion. And we were both throwing at each other. Well, remember the manifesto? We said we'd put the customer first and the data first. So what is the customer and the data telling us? And it really helped us do the right thing and make the right decision. So I think people might go, oh yeah, manifesto. It was actually really important. And then it's true behaviours that everybody's co-created and has adopted actually in every single market.
Yeah. And some of it's just really good discipline. Like, you know, one of the things is around start with the business problem, not the solution. So we were terrible at saying we want a 30-second ad and a print campaign and this how much budget we've got, and actually really with the discipline now of saying what is the problem we're trying to solve, what is the customer outcome we expect, what are the metrics that matter that we're going to measure ourselves against, and agree that before you even lift up a pencil, because actually quite often you end up, you know, you're trying to drive the outcome, and you're going in a world where you want data to really drive the decisioning and the content, then, you know, let's be true to that. And how do we put infrastructure around that to make it a reality?
Yeah. And I think you very kindly shared the manifesto with me, so I had a look at it, and I think what really stood out for me as well was a really kind of clear sort of sense of permission for people to call out if both sides are not living up to the manifesto, and you know, from both sides. And I think that's obviously a really important part of it, right? Is allowing the agency to feel as though they genuinely can speak up as well.
Yeah. We also put 360 in. So we said twice a year, we're going to do a really thorough 360 agency on client, client on agency, and actually use it to say, are we living the dream of the manifesto we put in place?
Yeah.
So how does it actually show up in reality? So we've got a sort of, formal infrastructure that says, let's just catch ourselves to say, are we really having the conversation in the moment? And if not, why not? And how do we action plan on the back of it?
And importantly, we both pay for that.
Yes.
So, we're both clients of Flock who run the research for us. And I think, again, that allows us to stay equal in terms of point of view and keeping ourselves honest, really.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, look, I'm conscious of time, and I want to leave enough time for us to actually talk about the work, which is sort of part of the reason we wanted to talk to you, particularly in the first place. And so I think, as I said, importantly, you've been creating some brilliant work. It's actually relatively new to market, actually, since the pitch that we've been talking about, which is the Here to Solve platform, I think launched in February 2020. It's a big part of why we're speaking today, and it's so much more. I think my observation is so much more than just an ad campaign or an inline. It feels like a real organizing thought for the business, and particularly it feels hugely customer centric.
Yeah.
Can you just bring to life for us a little bit about how you got there? Was it straightforward?
Well, so working to the new model, we went to the data. And we started with the data, and our data told us that customers most valued brands that solve, and our customers rated brands that solve daily problems in my life above all others. So in order, the objective for us was to truly move beyond like invisible utility or energy to a visible service organization. And in order to do that, we use this data to allow us to kind of drill into what I think is the true DNA of what British Gas does at its best. We go into people's homes, we solve their problems, whether that be a leaky pipe, busted electrics, broken boiler. That is British Gas's moment of glory and the biggest positive impact we can make in daily life. So, what we wanted to be is, and we wanted to communicate, is the fact that, we are the guys that solve stuff when the shit hits the fan at home. But importantly, what we wanted to do within that story is put our people, or as we now call them, our solvers, right at the heart of the story. Because this wasn't just about a transformation in how our customers see us, but we also wanted an internal transformation too. So we wanted to put our solvers front and center and then galvanize them around the true difference they can make in customers' daily lives, whether that's on the phone, in people's homes, or developing new customer experiences. So that's where it came from, and that was our intention behind the Here to Solve campaign.
And was it something that came out of the pitch, or was this something that subsequently that sort of arose after the new appointment?
It was subsequent after the appointment.
Okay.
It was an evolution of some of the thinking that we got to in the pitch when we went through the sort of what's the territory we want to play in. And it was the creative platform that was born out of that thinking, Charlie. And and the power of something that galvanizes internally and is really resonating with customers, because it started from, how do we drive greater consideration and more emotional connection for the British Gas brand around really what it stands for in the world and lives of customers. And it's done a phenomenal job. I think, pride in the badge has gone up. It's a real internal rallying cry. As Goldie says, how do you reward the super solvers? But how do you get that front and center of the, what's our purpose? Well, we're trying to solve things for our customers. And particularly in the current climate, it's really resonated with customers. We've seen a step change shift in consideration, particularly actually with non-BG customers, which is something I think the brand has really struggled with for years. How do you get people to reappraise?
Yeah.
It's more human, it connects, it resonates, but it gives the brand a much more active role, I think, both internally and externally. So, You know, I think you can draw a line from nucleus relationship to brilliant work, which everyone's really proud of internally. And, you know, I give, and hats off to the UK team. You know, I just sit in the centre, but those guys did a phenomenal job with real data and insight. Every vignette came out of data. You know, what is the reality of what's going on in customers' lives, and how do you drive that executionally?
And it feels like it's you know, obviously a brilliant consumer campaign and working with customers. Obviously, as well, it's an internal rallying cry for staff and the badge. It also feels like actually it's a brilliant exercise in sort of corporate reputation. It feels like it's a vision for customer experience and much more. So it's a real sort of triumph of integration in a way of what you set out to do. I suppose the one question I have is just, you know, how much of that comes from, how hard did you really have to work to deliver that true integration versus how much of that just comes out of landing on a really brilliant organizing thought that then falls out through the channels naturally because it is such a great central thought?
There's no point. I mean, I'm a great believer in the power of the big idea and creativity. You know, you can have a brilliant model, but if you haven't got the work that goes with it, I think it's pretty pointless. But, you know, you'll remember Marg said, when she appointed us, I think her quote was, you know, she saw some fantastic new model thinking, but ultimately the thing that swung it was the creative work, the creative ideas, the power of the creativity. So the two things together are the silver bullet, you know, the data-driven model plus the, you know, strong, big creative ideas that make a difference. And I think Here to Solve is one of those. And it was tested, you know, we never would have thought this during a global pandemic of all things. You know, it was not something we thought we would or could execute against, in all honesty. But because of the power of that platform, because it's so true to the brand, because in its execution, it reflects real modern British households of all shapes and sizes at their vibrant best, it allowed us, even in the eye of the storm, to stand out, create impact, and create positive conversations around the brand. And that is actually what makes me super proud, because next to a lot of all the doom and gloom and downbeat COVID messaging that we saw over the, you know, particularly the first 2 months of lockdown, Here to Solve was still what's the word, responsible and respectful of the environment we were all finding ourselves in, but it had a different tone to it, and it had an authenticity, I believe, that came from the idea itself, the solvers themselves, who actually shot themselves on their phones, their Zooms, you know, in their homes. I think that allowed us to really push the brand forward. You know, consideration went up, you know, and amongst non-customers actually, as well as existing customers. And it makes me feel like the future's super bright for Here to Solve. You know, we've only just begun with that platform. I feel like there's so much more we can do with it in service of British Gas.
Yeah, and actually, Marg, you have used the crawl, walk, run analogy a few times in conversations that we've had. And I think you even said the other day you feel like you're probably only really just walking at the moment, and there's so much more to come.
Yeah.
What do you hope to see more of in the future?
I mean, I think our massive opportunity, Charlie, is how can we become much more sophisticated in the sources and uses of data. So I think what we've got is a brilliant creative platform. Actually, there's a business now engaged, and belief in the platform. So even if I look at the success from the sort of first airing of the comms, it drove more money. Like basically, you know, and the night before we went on air, people were still debating, you know, do we get rid of the hair in the plug hole shot? And, you know, and actually, and interesting, this is where customer and data is really, really useful, because you go, you're not the core target. We tested this, you know, we know. So everybody responded to something in that execution that they didn't like. And, you know, in a senior level, people were nervous. So I think you've got a creative platform that people are excited about. Internally, it's driving more engagement and pride in the badge. I think our massive opportunity is how do we drive the sophistication of the model and really harness the power of the data we're sat on. And we are literally, I mean, we've gone live with what we call in Grid 1.0. But the opportunity that will bring, if we can really get into how do we leverage our first party data, will catalyze our opportunity for brilliance. And that's the bit I'm really excited by. So you will see better and stronger executions, more data-led thinking, and that will, I think, allow the brand just to carry on going stronger and stronger.
Okay, amazing. Right, well, look, very sadly, we are out of time, and I think going to have to leave it there. It's frustrating because I think we probably could have kept going for at least another half an hour, but it's not to be this time. A huge thank you, though, to both Marg and Sarah for being involved today, but also specifically for being so open and transparent and honest about the ups and downs of real-life relationships. And also a very big thank you to everyone for joining to watch today. The interview is now available for streaming, so please do share and with others you think might be interested to see it, and do come back to join us next week. Thanks very much and goodbye for now.
Bye.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you, bye.